Hello again. Welcome to our study. Explain this, please. Number 21 out of several verses that we're going to take one by one. Well, bosom. What in the world is a bosom and how does it work and what do we do with this? Well, let's take a look, see. Isaiah 40 is where we're going to start. Verse number 11, he said, "And he shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom, and shall gently lead those that are with young." Okay, what is he talking about? Well, in the East, people usually carry within the fold of their robe that could not be carried in the hand. Now, Isaiah tells us that the Savior will carry the lambs in his bosom. Well, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Lazarus is spoken of in Abraham's bosom. We pick this up in Luke chapter 16, verse 23. In the King James, it reads this way: "And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and he sees Abraham afar off and Lazarus in his bosom." The Jews believed that when a believer died, a believer in Abraham died, that he was ushered into Abraham's bosom. Abraham obviously being the first Jew. That's what they thought heaven was going to be like, is to be there with Abraham in Abraham's bosom. Well, from this particular parable, the one listed here in Luke 16, we get the idea of a banquet. Lazarus is an ulcerated and crippled beggar who had laid at the rich man's gate, contented with the scraps that were thrown out to him. He's translated, once he dies, to a feast, and he had the most intimate place among all the guests, reclining on the host's bosom. Okay, so he went from beggar to something far greater. Now he is in Abraham's bosom. The rich man had everything, the beggar had nothing. Well, what we see with this is Christ. He is in the bosom of the Father. That is, he possesses the closest intimacy with the Father. To be in the bosom is to have an intimate place. The place reserved for those whom it is prepared. See, what better place than an intimate place with the very Son of God? Well, the Jews reclined at meals, and this is an interesting analogy, but by this arrangement, the head of one person was brought almost into the bosom of the person who lay above him, and the guests were arranged so as to bring the most honored nearest to the host. The dinner bed was used by the Romans as well as the Jews. It had couches built around it. Each man, in order to feed himself, lay nearly flat on his chest or on his stomach and stretched out his hands toward the table. But afterwards, when his hunger was satisfied, he turned on his left side, leaning on his elbow. Now, each person was provided with a cushion or bolster, if you will, on which to support the upper part of his body on a raised position. As the left arm soon became so weary, the lower part of his body was extended diagonally with the feet outwards. So reading all that several times makes not a lot of sense. So let's look at it this way. We see from this particular advantage point, when we go to Luke chapter 7, verses 37, 38, we see how the woman who was a sinner might come behind Christ and wash his feet with tears and anoint them. Well, here's an illustration. Crude as it may be, this is the way they ate. I know they painted the picture of the Last Supper. They're all sitting around a table, but that's probably not the way it was. This is probably the way it looked then. They laid down on their stomach and they reached out and they ate that way. And so when they got through, they would lean over on their left side. Well, if in the process of leaning over, Jesus' feet would have been exposed, and this would give this woman the opportunity to take the oil and anoint Jesus and to wash his feet with her hair. We find that in Luke chapter 7. And here's another example of how this may have looked. So, what do we find out? Well, we find out the bosom is the place of uniqueness. It's the place reserved for only the best of the best. And you know what? One of these days, we'll see him as he is, and he will offer us that place in his bosom. He'll hold us close. That's something none of us can comprehend, but that's something all of us are looking forward to. So that will conclude this study. We'll see you on the next one. Be blessed and be safe.